This is lesson 313 in the Greek Philosophers. And we're going to begin with a question. And we've got a picture of a tiger. And let me ask you this question. What tools does a tiger have to help it survive? What survival tools does it have? Well, you could point to its fur, which is a camouflage fur to help it hide. It's got sharp claws, great strength, very sharp teeth. What tools does a turtle have to help it survive? You could point to its shell for protection and its flippers. What about a falcon? What's a falcon have? Well, you could point to its wings and its talons and its sharp beak and its incredible eyesight and its speed. And then what about human beings? What survival tools do people have, men and women, males and females? What do we have? Because we don't have sharp claws, we don't have teeth, we don't have the ability to run real fast, we don't have great eyesight. The one survival tool that man has that makes him and her rise above all the other animals on this planet is one thing, and that's the ability to reason. And that brings us to philosophy. Greek philosophy in the classical age. In Greek, the word philosophy means love of wisdom. To the Greeks, the love of wisdom was a virtue, and it was done through education and the ability to rationalize and reason. And therefore, in Greek, philosophy is the love of knowledge and reason. In other words, the Greeks believed that there was a truth that was out there, and you and I can get to that truth through our unique ability to observe and reason. There were many famous Greek philosophers, and here are the top three. Of course, we've got Socrates. Then we also have Aristotle. And in between Socrates and Aristotle, we also had Plato. But when we say Plato, we're not talking about Mickey's dog. We're talking about Plato. And so there were many philosophers. We had, of course, Archimedes, Eratosthenes, Alexander the Great. You can call him a philosopher. Sophocles, Pythagoras, Euripides, Homer. So let's start with Socrates. Socrates was a teacher, and there were two famous things that he is recorded to have said. Number one, the unexamined life is not worth living. If you're not reflecting and you're learning from your own life, it is not worth living. And he also said this: in every one of us, there are two ruling and directing principles whose guidance we follow wherever they may lead. Number one, an innate desire for pleasure, and number two, an acquired judgment that aspires after excellence. The philosophy of Socrates was this: all virtue is knowledge, and all knowledge is virtue. Knowledge and virtue are one in the same. And all real knowledge, that is to say, truth, is already present somewhere. You just have to go find it. And the goal of education should be to improve the individual. Education works best through critical questioning and open debate. Socrates' greatest contribution to education was the Socratic method. And some of you may have even participated in that kind of education. And the Socratic method was a question and answer approach to teaching and learning, to lead people to reach their own conclusions and to think of answers for themselves. Some interesting stuff about Socrates. One of the things that's really interesting is that we have absolutely none of Socrates' writings. Everything we know about Socrates came from one of his students, and that student was Plato. Socrates was sentenced to drink hemlock, and that's a poison. And he was sentenced to do that because he criticized the way that the city of Athens was conducting the Peloponnesian War. And so the city leaders drummed up two charges against him. Number one, they claimed that he was, quote, corrupting the youth of Athens, and that he was, number two, neglecting the city's gods. And I love this picture right here of Socrates carrying out his own execution, about to drink the hemlock, and his students are just kind of freaking out. They just can't believe that this event has come. And that brings us to Plato. He was also a teacher. And he said this: unless either philosophers become kings in their countries, or those who are now kings and rulers become inspired by a genuine desire for wisdom, that is to say, unless political power and philosophy meet together, there can be no rest from troubles for states nor for mankind. Plato had several philosophies. Number one, only a trained mind can understand reality. Any mind can understand reality, but it has to be trained and disciplined. Number two, a good life can only be lived with a just and rational government. If you do not live under a just and rational government, you're just not going to have a good life. And number three, and this was highly unusual for the time and the place in which Plato lived, he believed that men and women were both equally rational and capable. In fact, he's got this quote: if women are expected to do the same work as men, we must teach them the same things. And as you may know, throughout the centuries, women have struggled to get an education equal to that of men. Plato's contribution to politics, he wrote a book called The Republic, which claimed that the ideal form of government was one led by philosophers. And I love this quote by Plato. He said, wise men speak because they have something to say. Fools speak because they have to say something. Platonic realism. Plato taught that certain non-physical concepts, like, for example, numbers or geometric forms or even goodness, existed somewhere outside of our thoughts. You can't touch them, you can't see them, you can't feel them, but they exist in their own right somewhere out there in the universe, and those things do not need our minds to exist. Aristotle said they should rule who are able to rule best. In other words, who should get the job of ruling? Should it be somebody who was born under a king, somebody, a son or a grandson? Should it be somebody's brother-in-law? Should it be your nephew? Should it be somebody who bought the position? No. The position of ruler should be given to somebody who has a track record of good leadership. Another thing he said, the law is reason free from passion. In other words, if you're making decisions, legal decisions based on your emotions or your mood or your fears or your insecurity, that's not good law. And then he also said, law is order and good law is good order. The philosophy of Aristotle emphasized these things. Number one, analyze and classify everything based on careful observation. And that's science, people. We're going to see more of this philosophy when we talk about the scientific revolution. Next, to study politics is not only to seek knowledge, but to put it into practice. We're going to see that when we study the Renaissance. A constitution is more than a frame of government. It is a lifestyle. We're going to see a lot more about this concept when we study the American Revolution and especially the French Revolution. And the essence of a state is its moral character, and its purpose is to bring people together to help them attain virtue. And we're going to see that statement repeated again and again, especially when we study the Enlightenment, especially when we study an Enlightenment person named Jean-Jacques Rousseau. Aristotle's contribution to philosophy. Aristotle wrote a book called Politics, in which he tried to find the best form of government by analyzing existing political systems. And we're going to see that again when we talk about the Enlightenment also, especially with an Enlightenment person named Montesquieu. It's funny because Aristotle did not share Plato's view of women. He had a much more traditional, much more mainstream view of women. And Greeks were notoriously sexist, and one comment he made was, women are unfinished men. Some interesting stuff about Aristotle. For centuries, all the way up through the end of the Middle Ages, people thought that Aristotle was absolutely right about everything he said. If Aristotle said it, then it had to be true. Only later did scientists find out that he was actually wrong about a lot of things, like, for example, the composition of the universe. And we're going to see that when we study the scientific revolution.